Welcome, friends, to another evening of mystery alongside the brilliant detective Nero Wolfe and his ever-resourceful assistant, Archie Goodwin. Tonight, a stolen telegram leads them into a world tangled with hidden motives, corporate deception, and shadowed hearts. Before we dive into their pursuit of truth through the dark corridors of betrayal, tell me, where are you tuning in from and what time is it for you now? Settle in, because the secrets Nero Wolfe uncovers tonight will remind us all that beneath every polished surface lies the potential for deadly deceit. I was seated in the red leather chair, turning pages in a detective magazine so insultingly bad it deserved prosecution. When the knock came, Fritz, polishing a silver tray with religious devotion, barely lifted his head, leaving me to handle the interruption. I tossed the magazine onto Wolfe's desk, narrowly missing a priceless inkstand, and sauntered to the door. Standing there was a woman you didn't meet every day. Elegant without trying, but with a thinness around the mouth that suggested nerves weren't a stranger. I offered my best professional smile. "Mrs. Charlotte Vane," she said, before I could open my mouth as if memorized under duress. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." Urgent requests were as common around here as Fritz's soufflés. Still, there was something in the set of her shoulders that made me step aside without argument. I showed her into the office, and Wolfe, predictably, didn't even glance up. Wolfe was engaged in his afternoon ritual of glaring at a battered copy of the Iliad as if its translation personally insulted him. He flicked his gaze up at the newcomer with all the warmth of a snowdrift. "You are interrupting my reading," he said. "State your business succinctly." Mrs. Vane's hands twisted the strap of her handbag. "It concerns a matter of theft, Mr. Wolfe, and possibly murder." That got his attention. He set the book down, steepled his fingers, and regarded her as one might an unfamiliar but intriguing plant specimen. "My late husband, Philip Vane, received a telegram shortly before he died, a telegram containing information, sensitive information, which is now missing." "And the nature of this information?" Wolfe prompted. Mrs. Vane hesitated. "It's financial and personal, dangerous to certain men if revealed." I sat forward slightly. There was a quaver under her poise, a tightrope tension, suggesting that whatever she had walked into, she wasn't sure she would walk out unscathed. "I'm being watched, Mr. Wolfe," she said, "and if I'm not careful, I may end up sharing my husband's fate." Wolfe's heavy lids lowered halfway. That, for him, was outright excitement. "It disappeared the day after the funeral," Mrs. Vane continued, voice lower now, pitched to the room's thick carpets and mahogany panels. "I had seen it once. Philip showed it to me, but only briefly. It seemed to unnerve him terribly. He locked it away. After his death, when I went to retrieve his papers, it was gone." Wolfe shifted slightly in his chair. For him, this was equivalent to a lesser man leaping to his feet. "You believe the telegram was the impetus for his death?" "I'm certain of it." Her fingers, slender and precise, drew out a small, worn piece of paper from her bag, a scrap of the original envelope, torn cleanly across the middle. This was left behind. I leaned over to examine it. A fragment of an address. No full names, no return information. Whoever sent that telegram wasn't keen on leaving a trail. "And you have no idea what it contained?" Wolfe asked. Mrs. Vane shook her head. "Only that it was tied to Philip's dealings with Sutherland Industries and Falcon Securities. He spoke of a merger and of blackmail. A word to rouse even Nero Wolfe from mid-afternoon lethargy." I could feel the charge ripple through the room like static. "And what," Wolfe said softly, "do you expect me to find, madam?" "A message swallowed by avarice and deceit." "I expect you to find the truth," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Wolfe tapped his fingertips together, a small sound in the thickening air. "You implied others may have had reason to silence your husband," he said. Mrs. Vane nodded, lips tightening. Philip wasn't cautious. He thought he could leverage what he knew. He thought She broke off, mastering herself. There are men involved in that merger who have far more to lose than mere money. Her voice had dropped again, now edged with something darker. Fear. I have received letters, she said, anonymous, threatening, advising me to leave matters as they are. Some implied, directly, that I might suffer an accident. I glanced at Wolfe. His face remained unreadable, but there was a slight sharpening in the set of his mouth. You believe, he said, that someone has already killed once to suppress this telegram, and may kill again. I do. There was a silence that stretched just slightly too long. Finally, Wolfe stirred. Very well, madam. You may leave the matter in my hands. Archie will take the necessary particulars. As Mrs. Vane rose, gathering her handbag with trembling fingers, I caught a flicker of movement at the window, a shadow vanishing into the late afternoon light. The case, it seemed, had already found us. Mrs. Vane's brownstone was the kind of place that tried a little too hard to look effortless. Gleaming brass fixtures, overstuffed furniture, and the scent of expensive polish struggling to mask something less pleasant underneath. I was ushered inside by a maid who barely looked me in the eye and deposited in a parlour that had all the warmth of a tax accountant's waiting room. The staff, when they appeared, moved with a kind of rehearsed caution that set my instincts humming. The butler Gates arrived first, tall, sombre, and as polished as the silver he no doubt supervised. A few minutes later came Vivian Snow, the secretary, a slim, wary blonde with hands that fluttered once, nervously, before she tucked them into the folds of her skirt. I didn't need Wolfe's brilliance to recognize the signs: fear, guilt, and secrets packed neatly into human form. Mrs. Vane wasn't present. She had stepped out for errands, conveniently leaving me alone with her nervous household. I decided to make the most of the opportunity. If there was something rotten behind the brownstone's respectable facade, better to start digging before the scent of trouble got stronger. I asked to speak to Gates first. His posture suggested compliance, but the hard gleam in his eyes told me that whatever answers he gave, they would come heavily censored. And if there's one thing I knew about censored conversations, it's that they always hid the best stories. Gates led me into the study, closing the door behind us with the solemnity of a man sealing a tomb. He stood rigidly before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier awaiting court-martial. I understand you were present the night Mr. Vane passed, I began. His lips thinned into a tight white line. I was on duty, yes. And did you notice anything unusual? A pause. Too long. No, sir, he said at last. Mr. Vane retired early. I brought him his evening whisky as usual. He asked not to be disturbed. The words were neat and polished, but they rang false in my ears. Did he receive any visitors? Another pause, a slight flicker of the eyes. Not to my knowledge. Funny, I said lightly. I was under the impression someone came calling that night. A visitor Mr. Vane hadn't expected. I wouldn't know, sir, Gates said. His tone didn't change, but the knuckles of his clasped hands whitened perceptibly. I pushed a little harder, but it was like prying secrets from a tombstone. Gates gave me clipped, empty answers, revealing nothing and hinting everything. I left the study convinced of two things. Gates knew more than he was willing to share, and whatever he knew, it scared him half to death. I wasn't ready to force the issue. Not yet. Sometimes you get more by watching the cracks widen on their own. Besides, there was another source to tap, a more fragile one. Vivian Snow was waiting in the parlour, twisting a silk handkerchief around her fingers like a schoolgirl awaiting the principal's verdict. She rose when I entered, offering a tremulous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm just trying to do my job, she said, almost before I asked a question. Mrs. Vane is under a terrible strain. I imagine you are too, I said sympathetically. Losing an employer so suddenly and under cloudy circumstances. She flinched. Not much, but enough. I wasn't here that night, she said quickly. I had left early. So you weren't around when the mysterious telegram arrived? Her hands stilled. She looked up at me, panic flashing across her face like heat lightning. I don't know anything about a telegram. It was a lie so transparent it might as well have been wrapped in cellophane. I pressed gently. Someone sent a message that night. Important enough to make powerful people nervous. Important enough to make people die. Her breathing quickened. You must understand, Mr. Vane. He wasn't the man people thought he was. A slip. And she knew it. She clapped a hand to her mouth, horrified. Before I could coax anything else, she bolted to her feet under the excuse of tea preparation, leaving me with a room full of uncomfortable silences. Vivian knew. Gates knew. Mrs. Vane knew. And somewhere behind them all, a darker force was tightening the screws. I didn't leave empty-handed. A little gentle snooping while Vivian fussed in the kitchen turned up a small trove hidden beneath the silverware drawer. A packet of letters, badly creased and smelling faintly of tobacco. The handwriting was deliberately rough, the kind you see on ransom notes in cheap crime flicks. The message was simple, chilling, and repeated in various phrasing across half a dozen sheets. Leave it alone or follow him into the ground. I slid the letters into my inside jacket pocket without apology. If Mrs. Vane hadn't trusted me enough to share them, I wasn't about to trust her discretion with what came next. Outside, the late afternoon air was heavy with summer haze. The brownstone's front windows gleamed blankly at me like the empty eyes of a porcelain doll. Someone inside that house was lying. Someone outside it might be watching. And either way, the stakes had just gone up. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in a mood that could charbroil steak without fire. I laid the packet of threatening letters on his desk and offered my report without embroidery. He absorbed it all without comment, eyes narrowing only slightly when I mentioned the hesitations, the lies, the rising fear like smoke under the wallpaper. He shifted gears without warning. Mr. Vane, Wolfe said, was involved in a prospective merger between Sutherland Industries and Falcon Securities, a merger fraught with the opportunity for illicit enrichment. He flipped open a thick manila file, tapping a sheet with one blunt finger. There were discrepancies, he said. Significant ones, enough to encourage blackmail, enough to provoke murder. It wasn't much of a stretch to guess that the missing telegram contained evidence someone wanted buried deep, preferably alongside anyone who had seen it. The call came shortly after dusk, shrill and abrupt. Gates, the butler, had been found dead in his small, immaculate bedroom above the garage. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, a bottle of sleeping pills conveniently at hand, but I didn't believe it for a second. In his clenched hand, stiffened by death, was a fragment of yellowed paper, torn, dirty, and clutched with the desperation of a man who knew he wouldn't get a second chance. I didn't need Wolfe's prompting to know Gates had died for what he knew, and now so might we, if we weren't faster. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the phone rang, and there it was, the kind of call that would make any detective's day a bit more interesting. Inspector Kramer, ever the reluctant ally, was on the other end. The frustration was palpable in his voice. "Archie, I don't have the time for this," Kramer said, his voice tight. "But I'll tell you this much. Gates's death wasn't a suicide, not by a long shot. I didn't waste time with pleasantries." "Then what was it, Kramer?" "You've been sitting on your hands with this case for 2 days now. What's the real story?" He hesitated, clearly reluctant to give away too much. "Someone killed him, Goodwin. Someone with a very specific agenda." "Go on," I pressed, leaning back in my chair, savouring the impending revelation. I could hear the sharp scrape of his pencil against paper as he scribbled something down, likely an official report he hadn't even shown his own men. "He was poisoned, Archie. But it was done in such a way that it looked like an overdose, a simple suicide. It wasn't sloppy, it was planned." There it was. A twist as if the case hadn't already been twisted enough. A clever death, crafted with care, the kind Wolfe would surely relish. My mind started clicking away at the possibilities. "So, no suicide," I said, just to confirm. "A murder, then?" "Exactly. Now what are you going to do about it?" I grinned. "I'm going to get to the bottom of it, like always." Vivian Snow wasn't as confident as she had been the day before. When I arrived at her office the next morning, she was visibly shaken. Her face was pale and there was a tightness to her posture, as if she were ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I didn't waste any time. I sat down across from her, ignoring the formalities. "Miss Snow, I need to know everything you can tell me about the night Mr. Vane died. I know you weren't in the house at the time, but you must have seen something, or at least heard something." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of her desk, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. I knew what was coming. It was the same routine I'd seen before. People who knew too much always tried to backpedal. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, but the quiver in her voice told me otherwise. "I don't know anything. I wasn't there. Don't lie to me, Vivian." I leaned forward, giving her a steady, knowing look. "I can tell when someone's lying, and right now, you're terrified. Something happened that night, and I think you know what it is." She opened her mouth as though to deny it, but then she closed it. Her eyes dropped to the desk, and for the briefest of moments, I saw the weight of her fear in them. I can't," she broke off, her voice trembling. "I can't tell you everything. It's too dangerous." I waited, letting the silence stretch long enough for her to realize that I wasn't leaving until I had an answer. Finally, she took a deep breath and whispered, "There's something I've been keeping from you, Mr. Goodwin. Something I was told never to repeat." Vivian leaned closer, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Gates overheard something that night, a conversation between Mr. Vane and a man he didn't want anyone to know about, a visitor. He wasn't supposed to be there, and Mr. Vane didn't want anyone to hear." I could feel the weight of her words pressing down, and I stayed perfectly still, waiting for her to continue. She was reluctant, but the words finally spilled out. "They were talking about the telegram, about the information Mr. Vane had, the kind that could ruin people. I don't know exactly what was said, but Gates heard enough to know that it wasn't good. The man," he sounded threatening, like he was giving Mr. Vane an ultimatum. "Ultimatum?" I repeated, my mind working at full speed. "What kind of ultimatum?" She shook her head, wringing her hands together in her lap. "I don't know, but Gates was scared. He told me that Mr. Vane had a way of protecting himself with people like that. He said he wasn't worried about the man, but I think Gates was." It was starting to make sense. Someone had come to Mr. Vane to silence him, and Gates had overheard the exchange. Maybe he had been a witness to something more dangerous than anyone had realized. "Was the visitor ever identified?" I asked, my voice sharp with curiosity. Number Gates didn't know his name, but he said the man had a cold, smooth way about him, like he was used to making people obey. Vivian hesitated for a moment before reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a hotel receipt, worn and folded at the edges, the ink slightly faded. "What's this?" I asked, unfolding it carefully. The name on the receipt was typed in neat, precise letters, M. Sir Drake. I raised an eyebrow. "Monsieur Drake? Sounds like a man with a lot to hide?" Vivian nodded, her face pale. "It's a name I never heard before. I thought maybe it was the visitor's real name, but I couldn't be sure. Gates didn't recognize it, but he said the man had a way of getting things done without asking too many questions." The receipt was for a night at a hotel not far from the brownstone. It didn't take a genius to figure out that it could very well be the same man who had threatened Mr. Vane. I folded the receipt carefully and slid it into my jacket pocket. "You've done well, Miss Snow. Now, If you'd be kind enough to stay out of trouble while I handle the next part, we'll see if we can't find out more about Mr. M. Drake." As I turned to leave, I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back, her fear palpable in the still air. She didn't speak, but I could see the question in her eyes. Will I be safe now? I didn't have an answer, not yet. The name M. Drake stuck in my mind like a splinter. It was the kind of alias you find only in stories about men who think they're untouchable. But in my business, the untouchable always left a trail I was now determined to follow. I spent the morning chasing down every lead related to that receipt I'd found. The name had been printed on the hotel register, but the entry was suspiciously light on detail. No address, no real identification, just an out-of-place name in an expensive hotel's guestbook. One phone call led to another, and soon enough I had the name of a middleman who'd worked with a variety of high-profile clients, many of them involved with Sutherland Industries and Falcon Securities. The man's name was Victor Lasky, a name that hadn't come up in any of my previous inquiries. The quiet broker who acted as the middleman for shady deals, including those involving mergers, stock manipulation, and more. It was clear now that Monsieur Drake wasn't a visitor. He was the ghost that lived between the lines of Sutherland and Falcon. Lasky's office was located above a run-down bookstore in the middle of Manhattan. I knew I'd found the right place when the doorbell let out a weak, hollow ring that seemed to confirm everything. I returned to the brownstone that afternoon, the weight of the new information heavy on my mind. Wolfe was ensconced in his chair, as usual, gazing at the world through a haze of cigar smoke, an expression that meant he was thinking. I handed him the receipt for the hotel, the name M. Drake now burned into my memory, and the details about Lasky's involvement. Wolfe didn't flinch. His eyes glinted, as if the puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. "You've been at this long enough, Archie," Wolfe said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You already suspect what I suspect?" I nodded. That telegram, it wasn't just a note. It was a weapon, a business deal, a deal involving some very dangerous people. Wolfe tapped the edge of the receipt with his fingertips. The telegram, then, was no simple personal message. It contained evidence of corruption within the merger and blackmail. "Blackmail?" I repeated. "Precisely. Whoever had the telegram would have controlled the power of that merger, and Mr. Vane, in his arrogance, likely believed he could use it as leverage. Now his death is beginning to make sense. The man was dead because he had held the key to unraveling a fortune, and someone wasn't willing to let that happen. But who? That's what we're dealing with, Archie, a game of high stakes and even higher risks. Bradley Sutherland was everything I expected him to be. Arrogant, dismissive, and entirely too pleased with himself for my taste. I'd arranged an interview with him at his office, not giving him a choice in the matter. His secretary, who had a look that screamed, "I'd rather be anywhere else," led me through to his inner sanctum. He rose from behind a massive oak desk when I entered, a tall man in his 50s, but still with a sharpness in his posture that said he'd never let go of his youth. His dark eyes were calculating, and his smile didn't reach them. "Mr. Goodwin," he greeted, voice smooth, but just short of cordial. "What can I do for you?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You're involved in a deal with Falcon Securities, and I've got a few questions about the merger." His lips tightened. "I don't see how any of that concerns you." "It concerns me a great deal," I said, staring him down. "Particularly the part about blackmail." Sutherland's face didn't change, but the slight flicker of uncertainty in his eyes was enough. He'd heard me, and he knew I was right on target. "Mr. Vane had something that could destroy this whole thing, didn't he?" I pressed. "The telegram, the leverage." The arrogance was still there, but beneath it a hint of worry began to show. "You're wasting your time, Goodwin. This is all just talk." "It's not," I said, "and you know it. You're hiding something. I just haven't figured out exactly what it is yet." He didn't respond. But his silence spoke volumes. He was too polished, too practiced, and for a moment I wondered how many more people he'd buried to get where he was. If there was one thing that could be said about Lenore Falcon, it was that she didn't speak unless she meant to. The moment she walked into the room, I could feel the change in atmosphere. She was calm, almost too calm, like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her office was an exercise in minimalism, and it made me uncomfortable immediately. Nothing about it was personal, no pictures, no little knickknacks that might reveal the woman behind the mask, just sharp, clean lines and a polished desk. "Mr. Goodwin?" she said smoothly, taking a seat without waiting for me to offer her one. "I understand you've been making inquiries into the recent events surrounding Mr. Vane's death." "I have," I said, choosing to stand. "I have questions about the merger between Falcon Securities and Sutherland Industries." Lenore Falcon's smile didn't falter. "What you're asking about is business, Mr. Goodwin, and business is always complicated, but I'll say this. I didn't kill Mr. Vane, and neither did anyone I know." Her voice was controlled, precise, calculated, but I saw it. The slight tension at the corners of her eyes, the subtle rigidity in her shoulders. She was hiding something. "Then why, Miss Falcon, were you so keen on keeping the merger secret?" I asked. "What's so dangerous about a simple corporate deal?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "There are things you wouldn't understand. Things that don't concern you." "Try me," I said. "I think I understand perfectly." That night, Wolfe was brooding over his orchids, a rare sight. He was in one of his more contemplative moods, a mood that didn't often accompany a case like this. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up, "I've been thinking. We've been poking around in places that attract attention." "That's what we do, boss," I replied, dropping into my chair. "We chase trouble, and it catches up with us." Wolfe's eyes flicked up. "We're being watched, carefully, intelligently, and by someone who has every reason to stop us." "That's no surprise. I figured we'd attracted attention by now." He held up a piece of paper. An anonymous letter, crumpled, unsigned, but unmistakable in its threat. "Drop the case or forfeit the orchids." Wolfe's expression darkened, and for a moment I saw the full weight of the danger they were in. "Whoever this is, they don't care about our well-being. They want the truth buried. And we're very close to finding it, Archie." I could feel it then. The tension, the pressure, building on both sides. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop until we were buried along with the secrets. "Then we keep going," I said. "And let them try." Bradley Sutherland made a public confession the next morning, almost too convenient, like a man desperate to control the narrative. I'd expected some resistance, but not this theatrical surrender. The press conference was his stage, and he was performing his role to perfection, playing the part of the remorseful businessman who had simply made a few poor choices. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, with a stiff smile, looking straight into the cameras, "I admit to the mistake of bribing Mr. Vane over the merger negotiations. It was an error of judgment, nothing more." He paused dramatically, as if waiting for the audience's sympathy to pour in. It was almost laughable, except that the man was far too polished to make a mistake like this unless he had a very good reason. And the reason was clear. He was trying to distance himself from something more dangerous, the telegram. His confession barely touched on the topic, barely mentioned the scandal that could have ruined everything. In fact, he made it seem almost trivial. Sutherland's controlled demeanor reminded me of a man who had already won the game, as if he knew something we didn't. The confession was a clever smokescreen. He had no intention of letting anyone dig deeper into the real story, the one hidden beneath the surface. I leaned back in my chair, watching the show. The press might buy it, but I knew Wolfe wouldn't. The following day, Inspector Kramer was practically humming with satisfaction. I met him in his office, where he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped behind his head. A half-smile tugged at his lips, and his eyes gleamed with the certainty that the case was finally tied up. "We've got him, Goodwin," Kramer said with a satisfied grin. "Sutherland's confession is as good as a conviction. I don't know why you're still poking around. This case is closed. The rest of it is just window dressing." I couldn't hide my surprise. "You're ready to close it already? You're convinced that confession is all we need?" Kramer's smile widened, but there was a hardness to it. "What more do we need, Goodwin? He admitted to bribery. The telegrams are non-issue now, and there's no motive for anything else. The case is clean." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him with some amusement. It wasn't the first time I'd seen Kramer eager to close a case with one hand, even when the other was still in the dark. "You're forgetting one thing, Kramer," I said, my voice casual, yet knowing. "The telegram, there's something off about it. You're telling me you're willing to throw away the only piece of real evidence because Sutherland is giving you a neat confession?" Kramer's grin faltered, and for a moment his confidence wavered, but only for a moment. "I'm telling you it's over. Let it go." I didn't say another word, but I could feel the weight of the case shifting beneath our feet. There was more to it, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Sutherland's confession might have satisfied the public, but it wasn't enough for me. There was something about his story that didn't sit right. It was too tidy, too controlled. I decided to go back to the basics, dig deeper. I started with the timeline. Sutherland had admitted to bribing Vane over the merger, but I had my doubts about the specifics. The telegram, the one he'd downplayed as irrelevant, was the key. According to his confession, he'd been directly involved in the merger, but his actions didn't match up with the timeline. I paid a visit to Vane's office again and started checking flight records, travel logs and hotel stays. Sure enough, a quick search revealed that Bradley Sutherland had been out of the city the night the telegram had been sent. He couldn't have been involved in the conversation between Vane and his mysterious visitor if he wasn't even in town. It was a hole so wide I could drive a truck through it. I gathered my notes and made my way back to the brownstone, where Wolfe was already sitting at his desk, clearly aware I had something in hand. "Wolfe," I said, as I tossed the records on his desk, "Sutherland's confession just hit a bump. He wasn't even in the city when the telegram arrived. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, and I saw the shift in his demeanor. He was no longer just listening. He was calculating. That afternoon, as I was reviewing my notes, the phone rang, interrupting the flow of my thoughts. It was a call that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Vivian Snow had been killed, run down in a hit-and-run accident just outside her apartment. She was on her way to meet me to share new information. The accident, as Kramer had already called it, was too clean, too convenient. Another body to silence the truth. The kind of thing that happened when people were getting too close. I rushed out of the brownstone, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. A quick trip to the scene confirmed it. Vivian had been hit deliberately. No skid marks, no signs of braking. The car had come straight for her. Whoever had done it was sure they wouldn't be stopped. As I stood over the spot where she'd been killed, a chill ran through me. The deeper I dug into this case, the more I realized that I wasn't just uncovering a corporate conspiracy. This was a matter of life and death, and if the right people didn't get what they wanted, there would be more deaths before it was all over. I made my way back to the office, determined to find the answers before we lost more lives. The game had just changed, and Wolfe would have to move quickly. Vivian Snow's sudden death had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Wolfe, sensing my agitation beneath a casual veneer, had simply instructed me to retrace her steps. It wasn't sentimentality. Vivian had been about to hand me something significant, something powerful enough to make her a target. I owed it to her and myself to uncover what it was. I returned to her modest apartment, greeted by a nervous landlady. It didn't take long to find the small box Vivian had hidden beneath loose floorboards. Her amateur secrecy had hardly deterred anyone truly determined. I flipped open the lid, finding letters and scribbled notes, and among them a sheet of stationery that caught my eye immediately. It was the draft of another telegram, nearly identical to the one that had begun this deadly charade. Yet this version carried handwritten corrections in Vivian's careful script, indicating revisions, perhaps something she'd transcribed or reconstructed. Whatever the origin, she had wanted me to find it. The contents suggested something explosive, something intimately personal about Mrs. Charlotte Vane. This telegram wasn't corporate. It whispered of secrets long buried and deeply personal, implicating a name I already knew too well, Bradley Sutherland. As I carefully tucked it into my pocket, I felt a chill. The threads of this case were twisting tighter, binding personal betrayals with corporate treachery in a manner Wolfe would find simultaneously gratifying and maddening. The truth was more tangled than we'd imagined, and potentially deadlier. Back at the brownstone, I placed the telegram draft before Wolfe without preamble. His large fingers unfolded it slowly, eyes narrowing as he absorbed the words. When he finally looked up, his gaze was impenetrable. "This changes matters considerably, Archie," he murmured softly. "I thought it might," I replied lightly. "Especially since it implicates Mrs. Vane and Sutherland in something more than a business relationship." "Indeed," Wolfe confirmed dryly. "It appears the initial telegram was merely a veil obscuring the truth, a truth Mrs. Vane might be desperate to suppress." Wolfe's words were careful, measured, carrying the weight of hidden meanings. The telegram implied a past affair between the widow and Sutherland, an emotional entanglement strong enough to underpin blackmail or betrayal. If true, the affair painted Mrs. Vane not as victim, but potentially as manipulator. Wolfe frowned thoughtfully, pressing fingertips together. "We must reconsider everything we know of the widow," he said finally. "Is she victim, villain, or perhaps both?" He placed the telegram back onto the polished surface of his desk. The silence that settled between us was heavy, charged with the uncertainty of duplicity. We were no longer dealing solely with corporate greed. Now the passions of betrayal and old romantic sins complicated the equation immeasurably. Mrs. Vane sat in Wolfe's office again, her poise considerably diminished. I watched carefully, noting the tiny cracks now visible in her elegant mask. Wolfe's gaze rested heavily upon her as he spoke, tone deceptively mild. "Mrs. Vane," Wolfe began gently, "a disturbing new element has emerged, one that involves you personally. A second telegram draft was discovered, one implicating a history you failed to disclose." Her hand trembled slightly. "I don't know what you're insinuating, Mr. Wolfe." He sighed wearily. "Madam, pretense is tedious. It references your personal entanglement with Mr. Bradley Sutherland. Such a connection is critical and dangerous." Her cheeks paled noticeably. It was a mistake from years ago, Mr. Wolfe," she said, voice tight. "An indiscretion that ended bitterly. Philip knew about it and he forgave me." "Forgiveness is rarely uncomplicated," Wolfe stated gravely. "Such past sins seldom remain buried. You feared blackmail, perhaps from Sutherland, perhaps another." She nodded slowly, her composure fracturing further. "I feared ruin, Mr. Wolfe, but I never anticipated murder." Wolfe regarded her silently, assessing. I saw the complexity in her eyes, guilt, fear, regret, all tangled in a single troubled gaze. Was she a pawn or a player? Wolfe's face betrayed no conclusion, but I knew him well enough to sense his doubts. "Madam," Wolfe concluded quietly, "the truth will soon surface. Be prepared for its arrival." That evening, Wolfe summoned Saul Panzer, whose keen investigative skills had unearthed unsettling truths buried within Falcon Security's records. Wolfe's voice held controlled fury as he reviewed the data, his dark eyes glittering with intellectual anger. Falcon Securities deliberately falsified their valuations, he announced slowly, fingers tight around the documents. Thousands stand to lose fortunes, unless the merger proceeds swiftly and unnoticed. Saul nodded grimly. They were careful, Mr. Wolfe, but not careful enough. I felt a chill of realization settle over me. The original telegram contained these revelations? Wolfe's head inclined slightly. Precisely. Mr. Vane, whatever his faults, uncovered their deceit. Falcon's Securities stood poised upon catastrophe, Archie. Exposure meant ruin, perhaps imprisonment. My mind raced, connecting dots rapidly. So the telegram's theft and Vane's murder wasn't merely personal, it was financial self-preservation. Indeed, Wolfe replied. The emotional ties between Mrs. Vane and Sutherland served only to muddy waters already polluted by corporate corruption. His voice dropped lower, charged with tension. But someone remains desperate, and desperate men and women are dangerous. I glanced toward the windows, suddenly acutely aware of the darkness outside. It seemed as if shadows moved there, listening. Late that night, Wolfe stood among his orchids, a silent figure surrounded by serene beauty. I approached cautiously, sensing something had unsettled him deeply. In his large hand he held an envelope. His expression was darker than I'd ever seen. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. He handed me the note wordlessly. I read quickly, feeling my pulse quicken uncomfortably. "Drop the case or forfeit the orchids." I looked sharply at Wolfe, surprised to find his calm demeanor intact despite the threat to his beloved flowers. "They're threatening your orchids?" He nodded slowly. "An effective threat. Someone knows me intimately, Archie, knows precisely where to strike." I understood then the gravity of the moment. This wasn't merely a professional warning, it was intensely personal. Someone knew Wolfe's deepest vulnerability and had chosen to exploit it. Yet Wolfe's voice remained steady. "The threat confirms we are close, dangerously close, to exposing their treachery." I stared at him, seeing the quiet resolve beneath the surface. "And the orchids?" His eyes met mine, cold, determined, unwavering. "The orchids are delicate, Archie. But truth, justice, they are far more fragile. We proceed." When Wolfe called for the gathering, it was clear the endgame had begun. Invitations were dispatched without explanation. Charlotte Vane, Bradley Sutherland, Lenore Falcon, and Inspector Kramer were all summoned. Wolfe's choice of attendees was no mere formality. It was a carefully assembled cast of potential conspirators and observers. Kramer arrived first, scowling as usual, his patience thinner than cigarette smoke. Sutherland came shortly after, carrying himself like a man convinced he could still buy his way out of trouble. Charlotte Vane was quiet, her eyes lowered, her face pale with tension. Last was Lenore Falcon, cool and poised as ever, greeting Wolfe with a slight nod that betrayed nothing. Wolfe offered no immediate explanation, merely regarding each arrival with an inscrutable gaze from his oversized leather chair. His silence did its job, elevating the tension within the room until it felt like a physical weight pressing on everyone present. Even I, accustomed to Wolfe's methods, felt the prickle of anticipation. "Thank you all for coming," Wolfe finally began, his voice carrying with measured precision. "We are here to close an inquiry which has, regrettably, cost too many lives and revealed too many secrets. It is high time for clarity." He let the silence return, allowing each of them to dwell on the implications. No one spoke. They waited for him to continue, wary eyes flickering from face to face, each suspecting the other of betrayal. And rightly so. Wolfe leaned slightly forward, his massive hands folded carefully on the polished surface of his desk. "We began," he stated calmly, "with a telegram which ostensibly led to the death of Philip Vane, then Gates, and subsequently Vivian Snow. Initially, each event appeared unrelated or merely consequential, but appearances can be, and often are, deceiving." His gaze turned briefly to Bradley Sutherland, who sat stiffly, chin lifted in false bravado. Mr. Sutherland's confession was particularly compelling, a neat package to divert suspicion. But Mr. Sutherland, you were not in New York when the telegram arrived. Your confession, sir, was mere deception. Sutherland reddened, his confidence visibly slipping. Wolfe continued relentlessly. Then we discovered Falcon Securities' fraudulent financial records. Miss Falcon, your careful silence concealed a deeper malice. Thousands of investors, their fortunes imperiled by deliberate falsification. Mr. Vane had uncovered your secret. Lenore Falcon's icy demeanor didn't crack, though a vein throbbed slightly at her temple. Mrs. Vane, Wolfe said softly, turning to her, you presented yourself as victim and innocent, but even you hid your past involvement, fearful of exposure. Charlotte Vane's face trembled briefly before regaining composure. Each deception, Wolfe said deliberately, formed a layer covering a larger, more destructive truth. Wolfe's voice dropped slightly, taking on a subtler, almost contemplative note. Greed alone rarely compels murder. There are always emotions lurking beneath the surface. Betrayal, fear, desperation. Each of you was driven by powerful motives. He gestured toward Sutherland. You feared scandal and disgrace. Blackmail threatened not just your fortune, but your entire reputation. Your deception, though not murder, sprang from panic. He turned toward Charlotte Vane. Madam, your betrayal was not merely to your husband, but to your own sense of integrity. You concealed your past affair with Mr. Sutherland out of desperation and shame, hoping it would remain hidden. Her eyes filled briefly with tears, silently acknowledging the painful truth Wolfe exposed. Finally, Wolfe's attention fixed on Lenore Falcon. Your desperation was cold, Miss Falcon, born of ruthless pragmatism. You knew exposure meant financial ruin, disgrace, and imprisonment. Your fear, controlled but intense, prompted a calculated series of deaths. Gates and Miss Snow, victims in your ruthless attempt to silence the truth. Lenore's gaze flickered only once, an icy flame beneath carefully masked features. Wolfe paused, allowing the room to feel the weight of his words, the full emotional undercurrent of betrayal and fear, now plainly exposed. The gathered suspects shifted uneasily, each sensing that Wolfe's careful unravelling had cornered them. Wolfe rose slowly, towering with final authority. The architect of these events is not Bradley Sutherland nor Charlotte Vane, though both share moral culpability. The true criminal mastermind behind this deadly orchestration, Lenore Falcon. Falcon straightened imperceptibly, her face white and taut. Inspector Kramer stiffened, startled. Wolfe's voice rose slightly, firm and uncompromising. Miss Falcon, you orchestrated theft of the telegram containing damning audit revelations. You staged Gates's death meticulously as suicide, hoping to end suspicion. Vivian Snow's murder, disguised as accident, was your desperate effort to stop the final disclosure. Kramer stood abruptly, signaling to the officers outside. Miss Falcon, he growled, you'll come with us. Falcon rose gracefully, her icy control finally fracturing, eyes blazing with defiant anger. She said nothing, merely casting one venomous look at Wolfe before being escorted away. Wolfe sat back down slowly, folding his hands again, watching the others. Charlotte Vane's shoulders slumped, relief and grief mixed upon her face. Bradley Sutherland stared at the floor, humbled and humiliated. Wolfe spoke quietly into the heavy silence. Justice, like truth, is often harsh and unrelenting. Today it has triumphed, yet it leaves behind scars of betrayal and loss. Such is its nature. He glanced at me briefly, signaling the conclusion. The players dispersed slowly, each carrying away the painful lessons Wolfe had imparted. The tension, carefully built, remained palpable even after their exit, a somber echo of deceit, finally unmasked. Lenore Falcon stood rigidly as Wolfe's gaze settled firmly upon her. The room had gone silent, the air thick with expectation. Miss Falcon, Wolfe said with measured authority, your careful orchestration of theft, deceit and murder is at its end. You stand unmasked. She remained outwardly composed, though her clenched fists betrayed her fury. "Ridiculous," she spat, softly. "You've no proof?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Proof is abundant. You masterminded this intricate plot precisely because the stolen telegram contained irrefutable evidence of your firm's financial fraud. You understood clearly what disclosure would mean: financial ruin and criminal charges." Falcon attempted a derisive smile. "Speculation, Mr. Wolfe." He shook his head once, slowly. "No, madam, hardly speculation. You had Gates killed when you learned he overheard Vane's conversation, then neatly staged his suicide. Vivian Snow's tragic accident, another calculated execution, was committed because she possessed damning proof and sought to share it. Bradley Sutherland's forced confession, merely your distraction exploiting his vulnerability." Falcon's lips trembled slightly, the iron facade showing cracks. "You have nothing," she whispered defiantly, but her voice lacked conviction. Wolfe raised one heavy eyebrow. "On the contrary, Inspector Kramer has verified fingerprints, hotel receipts, financial records, all leading irrefutably to you. Your cleverness, Miss Falcon, was exceptional but insufficient." The inspector, with a nod, stepped forward, signaling the waiting officers outside. Falcon took an involuntary step backward, as if for a moment contemplating escape, but finally yielded, shoulders dropping as the cuffs closed around her wrists. "You'll regret this, Wolfe," she hissed as they led her away. Wolfe remained implacable. "Justice, madam, has no room for regret." Wolfe settled back into his chair, eyes reflective yet piercing. "Miss Falcon's cunning is undeniable, Archie, yet cunning alone seldom endures scrutiny." I nodded slowly, mentally connecting the dots of her sinister manipulations. "She staged Gates's murder with precision," I remarked. "Poison disguised as an overdose, perfectly believable." Then Vivian Snow, eliminating loose ends, seemed Falcon's specialty. "Precisely," Wolfe agreed evenly. Vivian's murder was executed swiftly but sloppily. It betrayed desperation. Falcon realized Vivian possessed damaging evidence, and Sutherland's confession was Falcon's strategic stroke. She leveraged past indiscretions to compel his public deceit. He paused, contemplating. "Yet she miscalculated." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "By involving too many players," Wolfe explained. "Her network of deceit inevitably collapsed under scrutiny. Every crime committed to hide the first telegram only further highlighted its value, and ultimately, her need to silence Gates and Vivian made transparent the telegram's true significance." I exhaled slowly, reflecting on the ruthless efficiency with which Falcon had orchestrated death. Wolfe read my expression clearly. "Do not pity her, Archie," Wolfe cautioned softly. "Her actions condemned her, not my intervention. Her willingness to destroy lives to protect mere profit placed her beyond redemption." I nodded soberly. "I don't pity her. It's the chain of consequences, how one deception led inexorably to another, that unsettles me." Wolfe sighed. "Deception, Archie, inevitably breeds further deception. Falcon learned that lesson at a terrible cost. Let it remain instructive to us all." Wolfe reached carefully into a drawer and produced a folded paper, the telegram itself, finally retrieved through Inspector Kramer's efforts. "The stolen telegram," Wolfe said quietly, unfolding it, "contains neither romantic scandal nor personal embarrassment. Instead, it delivers proof of deliberate financial fraud orchestrated by Falcon Securities, specifically falsified asset valuations intended to deceive investors and inflate stock prices." I leaned forward, astonished. "That's dynamite. It would have destroyed Falcon's reputation overnight." "Precisely why Falcon resorted to murder," Wolfe continued gravely. "Philip Vane threatened exposure. Initially, he sought blackmail, arrogantly believing Falcon would capitulate. He underestimated her ruthlessness." Wolfe handed me the telegram, and I scanned it quickly. Every line exposed Falcon's criminality starkly, with devastating clarity. "It wasn't mere scandal, it was utter ruin," I muttered, handing it back. "Enough to destroy a corporate empire." "Indeed," Wolfe agreed somberly. Falcon's empire rested upon deception. She valued profit above human life, underestimated the price of murder, and ultimately forfeited her humanity. Wolfe carefully folded the telegram again, setting it gently upon his desk. The case was fully unraveled, the truth exposed. Yet I sensed Wolfe's subdued mood went deeper. Even truth, he murmured quietly, is tarnished by association with corruption. Justice prevails today, Archie, but it leaves behind the bitterness of lost innocence. He fell silent, allowing the depth of the case's tragic implications to settle upon us both. Inspector Kramer closed his notebook decisively. "It's over, Wolfe. Falcon will stand trial. Justice served." Wolfe inclined his head slightly. "Justice, Inspector, carries burdens beyond mere imprisonment. Mrs. Vane, though legally exonerated, must now live with emotional scars inflicted by deceit." Charlotte Vane, seated quietly, lowered her eyes. Her posture spoke volumes, relief mixed painfully with lingering shame. Wolfe addressed her gently. "Madam, truth heals in time. Betrayal's wounds fade slowly, but they will fade." She nodded silently, rising with quiet dignity. As she left, Kramer sighed heavily. "A rotten business, Wolfe." Wolfe met his eyes squarely. "Indeed, Inspector, rot lies beneath the surface of many enterprises. Our duty, your duty, is to expose it." Kramer departed quietly, leaving Wolfe and me alone. Wolfe's heavy sigh filled the room. "Justice is achieved, Archie," he remarked softly. "Yet its shadow lingers, reminding us of human frailty. Falcon chose profit over virtue, a choice that poisoned everything she touched." I considered this silently, knowing Wolfe was right. Justice had come, but the scars left behind were permanent reminders of darker truths. Late that evening, as I relaxed in my chair, Fritz brought in the mail, a single envelope addressed boldly to Nero Wolfe. Wolfe took it, studying the handwriting carefully before slicing it open. Inside, another telegram lay neatly folded. Wolfe read it silently, his brow furrowing slightly. "Archie," he murmured softly, "it appears our respite will be brief." I sat up slowly, intrigued. "Trouble again?" He nodded solemnly, passing me the telegram. It contained a cryptic warning, an ominous hint of a fresh conspiracy. The game, it seemed, had not yet ended. In fact, it was merely beginning anew. "You've successfully completed your Nero Wolfe mystery. If you need further polishing, adjustments, or the start of another mystery, just say the word." Nero Wolfe settled deeper into his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Archie," he said slowly, eyes narrowing in contemplation, "cases like these remind us that beneath every deception lies a truth desperate to emerge. Lenore Falcon's downfall began not with greed, but arrogance, the belief that lies can outpace justice indefinitely. Ultimately, every hidden truth surfaces, exacting a heavy toll on all involved." I nodded, considering his words carefully. "It makes me wonder, what was Falcon's greatest mistake? Underestimating us, or overestimating herself? Friends, what do you think Falcon's biggest mistake was? Comment below, subscribe for more Nero Wolfe mysteries, and please, share this story with fellow detectives in your life.